So I have no idea if the sound on that worked or not, but whatever. If it didn't work, then, we're sound guys. We don't really know how to make sound stuff work. Welcome to the Audio Opinion Show, where audio people have opinions. And that's pretty much the deal. I'm joined by a whole bunch of my friends and becoming friends in the audio and music industry, mostly sound reinforcement folks, some wireless folks, some various folks, just people with opinions. And Ike, and I'm gonna share that one with the YouTube audience because that's kind of hilarious. It's the ASL opinion show today because I messed up the sound on the intro video. So we'll fix it in post. Like it's whatever. That's easy enough to do. All right, let's launch our poll because that's the first thing we do. So launching our poll, and the question for the first question is, why is Brian obsessed with The Princess Bride? Answer number 1, because it's a great movie. Hint, that's the real answer. Answer number 2, because Brian is a little odd. Also possibly an answer. 3, I don't know. And 4, I don't know, but I thought this was an audio show. And so votes are coming in. I'm going to vote, and it's neck and neck. It's very close. I'm waiting for somebody to put something other than because Brian is a little odd. It's not happening. And so, sure enough, the consensus from the group is that Brian is obsessed with The Princess Bride because Brian is a little odd. We'll concede that. Don't think the bit's going to go away though, because it's not. It's my show. It's my sandbox. Y'all just get to play in it. All right, let's see what our actual topic's going to be. Let's launch this one. I'm going to read it off for our YouTube crowd. Our topic: headset mics, Cardioid versus Omni. Second, feedback eliminators. Ew. Third, on-off versus mute buttons on consoles versus other console oddities that we like or hate. Number 4, lavalier mics, Cardioid versus Omni. Point source boxes. Do we fly them with the horn up or the horn down, which is also a whole how do we fly boxes and orientation. And last, patching. Do we go 1 for 1 versus we just soft patch it in the console because, that's what we do. We can do that, and so why wouldn't we? So let me check the results. This one's going to be close, kids. And it looks like we're going to be talking about headset microphones, which I'm sure we will veer off of within 5 minutes, but nevertheless, that's what we're going to start with. So we're going to start with headset mics, Cardioid versus Omni. And that's going to be our topic for today. Does anybody have an immediate thought that they would like to jump on in with? Go, Ike. I see that.
I'm an Omni guy. In fact, any of the questions that were Cardioid versus Omni, I might have put in there. Maybe some of the other questions too. But anyway, I've used Omni mics since I started in this business. I bought a pair of AKG D160s from somebody for super cheap, and I ended up using them as tom mics on a big 8 tom drum kit of the day, and they were fine. And I know that there's a huge amount of prejudice against Omni mics because they perceive to take sound from everywhere, like even countries that you're not in when you got the mic turned on. But the reality is that they don't do that because of the inverse square law, and that they get you away from things like proximity effect. So they're smoother. They're less likely, actually, in my opinion, less likely to feedback in situations like that because they don't have any frequency buildups that you get with Cardioid mics. And I don't remember. I dislike headset mics in general if it's for theater, because I think it just totally ruins the suspension of disbelief when everybody's walking around with something stuck on the side of their head. But in sticking with headset mics for a second, I have had problems with cardioid headset mics having much worse plosives than. Did you hear that? Did you hear that one? Plosives. Hear that happen? They're great. Much worse plosives than Omnis.
For demonstrating plosives. That was
Yeah,
an excellent demonstration.
yeah, much worse plosives than Omnis, and I'm pretty sure because it was, even though the mic was like off the side, like where it was supposed to be, it was a difference in pressure gradients that were affecting the capsule. So I'm Omni all the way, and that's my opinion, man.
So Ike is on Team Omni. Go ahead, Andy.
Well, I'm a right tool for the right job kind of guy.
Crazy talk.
And I've used both. And if we're sticking with headset mics, because I have different opinions about lavs, but with headset mics, if I can get away with an Omni, great. And for a lot of the same reasons that Ike mentioned, I mean, with an Omni, you do less EQ because you're not EQing the sort of I don't know how to describe them. I would call them bumps in the frequency response, and it all has to do with your if we're talking about PA systems here in front of a PA system, not some other application like sports or something like that. Yeah, Omnis if I can get away with it. I have done events in very echoey rooms where cardioid headset mics have saved the day. Absolutely saved the day. I did an event in a Tesla tire factory. I think it was the tire factory, the wheel factory. No, the seat factory. That's what it was. It was the seat factory in Fremont.
I'm fairly certain that the type of factory it was completely changed the way it's.
Absolutely. No, this was an enormous room.
Tire factory, everything would have been fine, but it was apparently the seat factory. And
yeah, I could talk about this event because it had to do. I'll just say this: it wasn't for Tesla; it was for another company that Tesla acquired before they acquired it. But we won't go into that. But the point is that for whatever reason, they decided to do their quarterly meeting in this factory, and so we brought in heavy velour drapes. And the reason we were doing it in the factory is because they got it for free. That's part of it. But I'm the sound guy. I'm the A1 on this gig. I'm like, oh God, and I said, we have to have cardioid lavs because Omnis will just pick the whole, they'll pick up too much. It'll sound, because they didn't want it to sound like they were in a factory. They wanted it to sound like they were in a hotel ballroom, and all that. So anyway, those saved the day along with the heavy velour drapes. I had them double them up too, in fact. I'm trying to think if there's anything more to say about this.
Well, if there is, we have plenty more show left. And as soon as
I'll shut up now. Someone else have an opinion.
You can jump in. Go ahead, Chris.
I was just going to say, okay, so cardioid mics need more EQ. Is that necessarily bad?
It can be. It can be. And I would say that one of the things that I've, it's funny, like I've at this point, I've come around full circle on a whole bunch of things when it comes to sound. But one of the things was, I used to kind of think that, well, I can kind of EQ in and out anything that I need to EQ in and out. Like I can kind of make whatever I need to sound, however I want to make it sound. And a lot of that was based on not really paying attention to the fact that with any kind of directional microphone, the frequency response changes completely depending on which direction the sound is coming from. So while I can kind of EQ one thing, I can't. So it's like you can, but I feel like you're also fighting it. Go ahead, Chris. We can argue. I like that.
I see your point, but this is a headset mic with a fixed distance. As you cut down the low, mid, and bass for proximity effects, you cut down the amount of spill being picked up from the PA, which is typically lower, mid, and bass.
Right, and I actually, with headset mics in particular, and I was trying to let everybody else go first because I'm actually fairly passionate about this particular topic, is that it's literally a classic example of what I was talking about of having come full circle because we used, E6s were the big like headset mic at first, and they were all Omnis, and they kind of worked, and they were pretty good or whatever. And so then we started getting people that were, presenters that like, can you put me in the monitors and can you, whatever. So then we started like feedback wars with headset mics. And so, or as Andy said, perfect example of really reverberant rooms. And we're trying to cut down on some of that stuff. And so we started seeing more and more, the DPA cardioid capsule and other, I used Countryman. I used a bunch of different things. And it's one of those fix one problem, created another kind of situations. Now, 90% of my working is in corporate, where unfortunately you can only control the talent so much, and you can only control the circumstances so much. And so the problem that happens is you can't get them to rehearsal, or if you get them to rehearsal, they come in 3 seconds before they're supposed to go on stage for the actual event, and your A2 furiously throws the microphone on them and gets it positioned like the way that they think it should be, and then they turn their back for 3 seconds, they head to the stage, and they take their sweater off and put their jacket on and do whatever other nonsense they do, and now the microphone that was perfectly positioned is now over here. And because it's a cardioid mic, it sounds completely different because the position has moved. Whereas if it was an Omni mic and it went from here to here, it sounds the same, just not as loud. And so, so a lot of my kind of circling back to preferring Omnis for headsets now has everything to do with just the practicality of, like if I can nail it to somebody and it's a fixed situation and maybe it's an actor in a theater, it's like something that I know it's not going to move. Cardioid mics are great because you can make them sound awesome, less interference from other things. The world that I live in doesn't live there. And so the number of times where I've gotten, totally, screwed by somebody hitting the microphone, moving the thing, doing the whatever, it slides a little bit forward, and now I'm in plosive land, P-pop land and all this stuff. And, it's just made me move back to Omni capsules, and it's like, get an Omni capsule, get it somewhere in this general vicinity. If it moves around a little bit, it'll still sound basically the same. And I'm already talking too much, but it also gets into pattern control of loudspeaker systems and other things, but I won't take everybody's point. So I don't know, Ed, I always end up picking you last, so now you're not going to get picked last. What do you think?
I stick mostly with cardioid. I can understand the points that you guys are making, but for me, the pattern control in the types of gigs I'm doing is more important. And I'm willing to deal with the downfalls as you guys are looking at them, as just that's the how you use the tool. But like Andy said, I think the right tool for the job. So if I'm doing something where it's a one-on-one interview, quiet room kind of thing, or there's no audience and no PA, then yeah, I'll do an Omni. When I do certain broadcast things, they tend to be, I do some of these pre-fight coverage things for UFC. And sometimes we're in the arenas in like a space where we're overlooking the show, and there's no chance that I'm doing an Omni on that kind of show.
Because it's a little loud.
Yeah, exactly. We mostly for those things use like shotcaster type, headset mics instead of the typical, little E6 or DPA. But yeah, no, the pattern control for me is what it's about on the gigs I'm doing. Cause like you said, Brian, they'll want something in the fold back, as if they can't hear themselves talking. But it's just, for me, that's what it is. And a lot of times I just get stuck with what they have with my clients, cause I'm a freelancer. So, I work with what I got, and I'll be happy to take the cardioids.
Yeah, I mean, the cardioids work great, like I said, as long as you can kind of, if you have any control whatsoever over the positioning and it actually doesn't change, then, I used to use these Countrymen? No, it wasn't a country. It might have been the GL 80s GL40. I'm drawing a blank on, but it was a slightly more bulky, kind of a square looking capsule. But man, was it directional! Like I could make the PA scream at somebody's face, and it would work. But it basically had to be like glued exactly where it was, and but I had a particular client who it was motivational speaking kind of thing, and he wanted the monitors blaring back at rock and roll levels, and wanted it to sound big and full and all this stuff. And so again, right tool for the job, Rittenhouse.
Well, I love the Omnis as well tonally, but if you've ever had a panel of like 6 to 8 people on stage in a corporate event and you're running it through a Dugan, the Omnis sometimes will trigger the Dugan on other mics. In that situation, I do like the Cardioids a lot better. But once again, depending upon PA and everything else, sure, I've been going more towards the Omnis because I think tonally they sound better. They sound more accurate. But there are still definitely times you're going to want a Cardioid, and the Dugan is one of those situations.
Well, especially especially when, and I had as one of the other options for us to talk about lavalier mics, Omni versus Cardioid, and it's like, then I lean more towards Cardioid because it's I need the rejection more because the microphone is so much farther away from the sound source. I mean, Ike's point, which I never really thought of ever doing that, but it's actually kind of brilliant, is that for an awful lot of situations, an Omni mic on a drum would be fine. You just have to like kind of alter the way that you're, kind of constructing your miking technique. But there's a lot to be said for the tonality of, I'm going to get a relatively flat response out of this microphone. It's not going to change based on a slight difference in angle. I kind of know what I'm going to get, and the microphone is hearing 145 dB. Like, I don't really need to worry about rejection because it's an inch away from 140 dB sound source, so it's fine. Like, that's it's a really interesting point. And then someone else speaks.
Sorry, did you hear that?
I didn't. Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I was just saying my decision process at the time was that those mics were cheap and I was 18 years old. So, but I learned things from using them, and mostly not to be afraid of Omni microphones because they get so much kind of bad press, and there's so much kind of thing like, it's Omni, it picks up sound from everywhere. And it's like, yeah, it's not exactly how it works. But yeah, anyway, just going to step back out here, but that was just something I wanted to point out. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it's great. Well, and Chris, what microphone are you using right now?
And it's a Bayer TGX 930.
That is very esoteric. You win the esoteric award because I didn't know what that was at all.
Well, they set off with one of their pencil condensers and just made it into a vocal mic.
Oh, well, there you go.
Quite like it.
But I want to say, like, what's the old there was a mic that looked, where I was going in my brain was, there's a mic that looked at least in the same general ballpark of similar to what Chris has. Somebody's going to remember what it was, but like a lot of them.
Shure made one that looks very much like that, actually.
3, was it maybe?
63, I think.
Yeah, which I
SM63. I was just looking at one like a couple of hours ago online.
And was that, and I may be also conflating this with something else in my head, but I remember that there was like a stick mic that you would see a lot of on, in the field reporters using, like, might have been an EV or something. That was an Omni mic. Yeah, I forget, what's that one called, Ike? Remind me.
That is the EV635A, the reporter mic forever. And they made a longer shaft version of it so you could get it further up into the talent's face. But yeah, I mean, particularly like if you're in a scrum, if your mic is off axis from, whatever person you're trying to pick up, it's going to be a problem. So they always use, plus, the reporter. And what did you think about that kind of thing, right? So
Right.
Omni mics definitely for interviews like that.
Well, and again, it's that whole thing of it's loosey goosey, and so okay, we can throw a compressor on this to kind of get the level to even out. If the sound quality doesn't change dramatically with me being closer to the interviewee and closer to me or what, like if the tonality doesn't change, it's just basically a volume level thing, then you're going to get a more consistent result. I mean, it makes perfect sense. And I do definitely agree with you, Ike, that, especially in sound reinforcement, we're just so like, our mindset is we're just always thinking directional microphones, and we're just always thinking in terms of trying to reject what we don't want and trying to get what we do want. And all that makes good sense. But I can't remember if it was you or someone else on the panel, but I think Michael Lawrence also says this, but picking your mic based on what the off-axis response is as much as what the on-axis response is, because it's not just enough to be rejecting what I don't want. I also don't want what's leaking in to sound bad. Like, in other words,
that was just for the record. That was Michael, and it's been attributed to me twice on the show now. But it's definitely it was Michael Lawrence.
Ike said it, and he's brilliant. So that's it. We have now altered history, and Ike has said it, and that's the way it's going to be. So, I'm sorry.
I was just going to say that with Omni, to that point, when I've done theater, if we've been able to use Omnis instead of Cardioids, because Omnis are good for theater in a lot of cases, it cuts the sound check in half, because you're not dealing with having to EQ the mic because the mic is relatively flat, and everything just sounds a lot more natural, as long as you have a lot of pattern control over your PA and other factors, obviously, that play into that. But oh my God, if you can use an Omni in theater, it's so nice. It just cuts down a lot of issues and problems.
So Keith, out in the wild where you live, out amongst the trees, what is your preferred microphone choice on your iPad?
It is the microphone that's built into the iPad. As far as headset mics are concerned, I don't do a whole lot of corporate work any longer. Back when I was doing it, I never got the choice. It was always what was provided. I was always, some sound company would call me up and say, "Hey, we need an A1 or an A2 or whatever. Can you do it?" Yeah, sure. Show up and whatever they threw at me. I will agree with the Omni. They sound perfectly fine, depending on the PA and the room. So, I would prefer to use an Omni, depending on the PA and the room.
And depending on the situation, like, I'm going to assume that the iPad microphone is Omni, and we got a pretty good bird solo along with you, which was a good example of the microphone hears everything, and so perhaps, I'm just picking on you, Keith, as an example because you happen to be in the right spot at the right time. But, if you had a directional microphone, then we might not have had quite as much bird solo, which might have been what we want.
I could run inside and grab my Shure, whatever the thing is that sticks into the.
All right.
And we can see if that makes a difference. I have no idea.
Yeah, but it's a good example. Go ahead, Chris. You were going to say something.
Yeah. There we go. Just that tablets and phones and things tend to use microarrays, and they'll look at incoming sound instances. And so actually the bird was probably behind you and directly in line, I guess.
So there you go. There you go. Modern technology, microphone arrays. That's speaking of which, that's a whole nother topic to talk about at some point, is directional mic arrays, and are they ready for like, I don't want to say prime time use, but like production use. I know they're very common in consumer products, but I don't know. Every time
conferencing too.
Yeah, we use them in conferencing all the time.
And I know, David, you do a lot of, it's a slight rabbit trail, but talk about that.
I don't do a ton of conferencing. A little bit. You know, my primary microphone application here for headset is referees,
Right.
which I don't deal with a ton because a lot of conferences don't even allow the referees to wear a headset mic because they're wearing the inner referee mic to talk to each other's already. So I'm stuck with lapels. But in the times we do, it's got to be Omni for that, just simply due to wind noise. And Omni's going to have, I think it's close to 20 dB of wind noise rejection over a cardioid. And that gets to be huge outdoors.
That's actually, I learned that the hard way like 5 years ago. Only you'd think I'd know better, but I just for whatever reason, I had never, and I was in a situation and I was, you know, it was lavs, but it was 184s or 185s or something, and we were inside, and it was a TV thing, and they were like, we don't like the way that those look with the big windscreens on. Can you take the windscreens off? And I was like, yeah, we're inside. Like, I can't see any reason why I wouldn't be able to take the windscreens off. And I took the windscreens off these 184s. And basically, if 3 air molecules touched sideways across that stupid mic element, it went like it was. I had never tried it without the windscreen. And I just sort of kind of figured it was kind of like a 58 without a windscreen, forgetting, of course, that a 58 has a windscreen inside of it. But it was just interesting. It was like, yeah, what an enormous difference it makes if a microphone is directional as far as wind noise goes. Which, again, you know, getting back to headset mics, it's like then every little breath noise becomes uber critical, and you have to put the little foam sock on it.
We've tried windscreens over windscreens on cardioids, and it's still not enough to really make a difference outdoors.
Go ahead, Jan.
Shure just made a deal with Q5X. I don't know if any of you guys have seen that. That's the new sports mic that's supposed to be small and fits in. I can put a link in the thing. I wonder if any of you guys have seen it. I also want to say one thing. I thank you for inviting me. Of course, I'm not as tech expertise as you guys. I'm more of a vendor, and I'm learning so much from you guys. Thanks.
Well, and most important, since you are actually the only one on the panel that's using a headset microphone, the most important thing for us to know right now is your microphone an Omni or is it a Cardioid?
Well, it's
Looks
both.
like an Omni.
It's
Yeah.
both, actually. It is the point source mic, and basically it's a cardioid, as well as, based on this, it's a black electric condenser mic, unidirectional, but it's also cardioid as well. So it's both.
Well, there you go. Well, and I want to say that I've seen, and then Karl, I'm going to make you talk because you were getting ready to talk anyway, and you'll have something smart to say. But I want to say, I don't know if it was DPA. I feel like there was a headset that I used at one point that basically it just had essentially a port blocking tube, and so it was directional, and then you just put a little like tube on it that basically blocked the reverse ports and essentially magically turned it into an Omni mic. I know the MX150s, the little lavs, you know, the only real difference between the directional and the non-directional is that there's just a little port opening in there. And I've had situations where I had a mixture of both, and I basically needed them all to be Omnis, and I just took a little piece of gaff tape and basically blocked the ports, and they were virtually indistinguishable in headphones between the modified and unmodified. But anyway, Karl, you know a thing or two about microphones.
A couple things. I think everyone's covered this stuff really well, but a couple of the thoughts that came to mind were that in free field, Omnis and Cardioids, the difference in gain before feedback isn't that great. It's maybe 3 dB, but it's when you get really close to the subject that this starts to really matter. And you guys nailed it when you talked about, proximity effect playing a big role. Chris, I liked what you said, the fact that if you get a cardioid close to the voice, then begin to EQ out that bump, you're actually EQing out a lot of the background garbage. So that's where the gain before feedback really starts to become useful. But the downside of that, kind of what you said, Brian, is the fact that, if placement really matters. It starts to get super critical when you get that close. And I've been in situations where I've had cardioid mics like that kind of get overwhelmed, and they just sound muffled, and you kind of can't even EQ it all out before it starts to sound terrible. And Omnis, man, you get those things right up to the corner of the mouth and get this wonderful gain before feedback as a result of that. And they sound flat as can be because there's no proximity effect. And that wind effect as well, the popping and plosives that you mentioned. I guess that was Ike talking about that. Yeah, I mean, that's a big factor. In my main world now, production sound, they're using Omnis, but they're finding ways that they have to even cover those with wind socks. And that gets into a whole world. There's a whole universe of accessories to go with even the Omni mics, and cardioids are almost never used. They're just not, they don't add enough, but you're not working with a PA most of the time. So, but yeah, I typically prefer Omnis like Ike. We come from the same school of thought there. But, when a cardioid is the right tool, it's the right tool. And that story about the Tesla factory is a good example. Maybe that just a few dB made the difference to make it workable where Omnis wouldn't have worked. And it's not, no more is it about the subtleties of, flat sound. It sounds exactly like the person speaking. Who cares? I mean, the point is intelligibility and lack of garbage getting into the PA. And I mean, if cardioid's a tool to do it with, then that's what you want.
Yeah, like, at the end of the day, it's like, if we need to hear the person speaking over the sound of the factory machinery in the background, at the end of the day, perfectly flat frequency response is not the number one thing we're concerned about. Jan.
Karl, when I was working for A1, when we were doing a lot of Broadway, we always used the Sennheiser MKE2.
Yeah, it's a classic.
Why did we do that?
Well, it's a mic that came into its own along with the Sennheiser wireless back in the day. And I mean, they designed that stuff for that purpose specifically and for broadcast with a little bit of an intelligibility bump. It's a great sounding mic. It's relatively small for its time. And, it just was the number one mic for a very long time for those reasons. They had the sound and the physical package. And, that was before DPA came along and some other manufacturers that made things that were smaller and maybe a little flatter or that kind of stuff, more concealable. But no, it was the king of its time for its applications. Absolutely.
Yeah, I cut my teeth on Mickey 2s and hated life a lot of times with Mickey 2s because it was, the late 80s, early 90s, and speaker cabinets basically had no pattern control below about like 1.2K.
Which is why that one about hanging trap boxes horn down was in the list.
Right.
We'll get to that on another show.
I promise you, Ike, it will. You saw I put it in. It will absolutely get in there. But yeah, and it's funny because probably if I had the PAs from today when I started back in the day, I probably would not have hated Mickey 2s that much. They probably would have been great because just having so much more low-end pattern control in the box would have made it, because it was a great sounding natural microphone, but I couldn't get it loud without it going whoa because of the stupid PA getting back into it. And so then, always looking for, and that's where the Shure 185s and 184s sort of, saved the day because they had so much better so much better directionality of the microphone that you could actually put some warmth into the lav mic and through a PA and have it work. But again, that's a topic that comes up, kind of for me anyway, over and over and over in these conversations is so many of the things that we progressed through in the last 20 to 30 years are almost coming back full circle again, just because the loudspeaker systems have changed so much. And so you're looking at things from a completely different angle. Again, I used a lot of directional headset microphones because the pattern control of the PA wasn't very good. When the pattern control of the PA got better, then it's like, I want to go back to an Omni microphone because it's easier to work with and, it starts to have more advantages.
That's
like
a really
we were talking
important
before,
point.
Yeah.
Sorry, Karl. That's a really important point because what we're talking about is decisions that were made in less than ideal circumstances. And now that the circumstances are more ideal than they were, is to be open-minded enough to sort of set aside these industry things that everybody knows and kind of go back to first principles and go, oh, okay, yeah, now that that isn't a problem anymore, maybe I can do this and I don't have to make this other compromise that we were making for 30 years because that's what was available or that's what we had to do.
Yep,
And
absolutely.
and just one other point, there's a lot of talk about flat response and this flat and flat. And I'm a really big believer in taking what you need. So for example, in a lav mic or a headset mic situation, yeah, it's particularly a good Omni lav, for example, those things can be like ruler flat from 20 to 20, but maybe what you need is like what I call it the picnic table, because I use high pass and low pass filters. And maybe what you need is 300 to 4K. And that, some of that really high frequency pingy feedback that you're getting when you get too close to the PA, you don't even need to have those frequencies on that particular microphone. So it's just a kind of a way of thinking of, instead of just doing it the way we've always done it, it's just step back and go, well, what could work in this situation? Over to you, Karl.
Yeah, well, I mean, I totally agree with you, Ike, and you and I agree on so many things, but I was about to bring up the fact that you got to know your sources too. Like voice, the lowest voice that you're likely to ever run into is down to maybe 80 hertz, and probably not that even. So unless you get into like operatic bass singers, that's the only time you might get below 70 or 80 hertz. So you could definitely cut everything up to that point. And then there's not much energy above 10K for sure, and maybe not even 8K in most sources. So you don't want to go too hog wild with anything that does maybe have upper harmonics like strings or whatever. But for voice, absolutely. But I was going to say too that the change to in-ear monitors has been another giant change that has allowed more Omni mics out there. I mean, PA pattern control, yes, and that's been a wonderful evolution to see. But the dramatic change was removal of wedges from the stage, even more than that. So those things have made a major factor. But one other thing I wanted to mention, and this comes off of what Chris was talking about earlier, the most extreme example of headset mics that are directional are the noise canceling headsets, and there's also the Coles lip mic. These are all based on a figure 8 pattern mic, which has more directionality than Cardioid. And then when you get it super close, then you EQ out the bass. And man, I mean, that's what they use, like helicopter headset, mics and stuff, where you've got a super loud background noise, and yet you need intelligibility. But those are also frequency restricted in most cases, where they wouldn't necessarily be used for music, but it's an extreme example of using a directional mic to absolutely kill background noise when you really have to.
Right, which is yeah, that's actually super cool example, and I sort of kind of knew that's how those worked, but now I know even better. Go ahead, Andy.
Oh, and I think you're talking about dipthoid control. I seem to remember Tom Petty making an appearance on Saturday Night Live, and it just sounded like he was in a studio. There was so much rejection, and I think he was using one of those Crown. I think at the time Crown had a handheld
311
mic.
CM 311.
Yeah, I don't know if he was using that at the time, but it just sounded like that. I wanted to, at the risk of throwing a wrench into this conversation, there's one thing that we have to think about in the age of COVID, which is self-miking. I've been an A2 a lot. I'm an A1, but I've been an A2 a lot, and I'm fully preparing myself on a job coming in as an A2 and having the talent not want me to touch them.
Right.
So I'll be talking them through how to mic. And we had a conversation with one of the companies I work for the other day about this, actually having, pictures with circles and lines and things like, this is how you do this. So they can get the mic, whatever mic it is, whether it be a lav or a headset. I'm really going to push for the DPA define, because those are easier to put on, I think, than some of the other types. Point Source, by the way, speaking of Point Source, they did like 2 hours. I didn't think you could talk for 2 hours on self-miking, but they did. Part of it was a product pitch too for them, because they do make great products from what I can tell. But that may be a subject for another show, Brian.
Well,
but it does factor into what we're talking about now to some degree.
No, absolutely. No, and I mean, it's absolutely a fantastic point because, so much of what what I was harping on is, mic position becomes so important if you do this and this and, on and on and on and on. And yeah, this is a limitation that is going to be placed upon us. We're going to be dealing with situations where even just reaching out and adjusting a microphone 3 inches or doing a minor change or whatever is going to be something that we just won't be able to do. And we are going to have to think in terms of, what's the solution that's still going to work the best in this situation. I mean,
and that behavior may last for years beyond COVID because of just that, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Go ahead, Jan.
A little deviation. I'm very paranoid about COVID, and one of my vendors, Hamilton Buell, came up with this handheld ultraviolet C, and say, what is it? You turn on a light to sanitize, and the idea was to use it for microphones, and I think it's a great idea. 10 seconds under this light, and it's sanitized.
Interesting. So that will be definitely a topic for another day. Although Karl
link in for that, please.
Has things. Go, Karl.
Yeah, just two quick things about this. First, let me go with the UVC thing. So we've talked to some of our vendors about the plastics used, like for keypads, mic jackets, and so on. And basically, since there's no UVC that gets through the atmosphere to the surface, even stuff that's supposed to be used outside is not UVC proof. So 10 seconds may not do much, but just be aware that cumulative UVC exposure on plastics will probably degrade the plastics. They may discolor, they may deplasticize and become brittle. It depends on the plastic. So just be aware of that. And let's see, there was something else. Oh yeah, a story from yesterday. I was involved with a webinar on practical show tech. And one of our guys was talking about being ready for actors or talent or whatever to say, no, you go ahead and put it on me. So he's dealt with that where they had everything where the talent was supposed to self-mic, but they would come to him and say, no, you go ahead and do it. So he had to be ready with gloves, a mask, the hand gel and everything. So just be ready for both contingencies. Some talent may be totally comfortable self-micing and some may not, and you've got to be ready for that.
Right. And in some cases, and I will go to you, I promise. And in some cases, it's going to be, I know for me, for a lot of my corporate clients, it's going to be my client is going to dictate it. Like they may just tell me that, no, we're only going to allow them to self-mic for, safety reasons or insurance reasons or whatever. And then I'll have to tell this person, I'm sorry, I'm not allowed to do that. I mean, it's an interest. We're about to go through interesting times, I think. Ike, go ahead.
I was just going to say that when you get into the self-miking thing, if you have a microphone that has a this side and a that side, then it definitely leaves the possibility open where someone puts their mic in backwards and that you get a really muffled sounding cardioid facing away from their face. So that's something to be mindful of. And the other thing is over to you, Keith.
Yep. Perfect second.
Thank you. Yes, I just have to say that I have another call I've got to get on and I have to jump off. I'm sorry.
That's quite all right.
Yes, sir.
Everyone is always welcome to jump off early. That's perfectly fine.
Thank you. Very, very, very interesting subject here. Thank you.
You bet.
Just back to the hygiene thing for a second. It's like, in some ways, I was like, why is this a new thing? I have never wanted people to get a cold, herpes, anything off of any microphone that I've been handling. I've always had alcohol prep pads on my table. I have always had hand sanitizer on my table. So, whether it was flu or whatever the hell was going around, I was like, keep your stuff clean. That's what I say. And so in a lot of ways, I think it's actually more the interpersonal contact than the hardware at this point. I mean, the hardware should have been clean before, it should be clean now. So keep your stuff clean.
Right. Theoretically. Go ahead, Ed.
I also think we're going to be seeing a lot of talent bringing their own mics now, their own elements, which means we may have less choice of what we're going to see. You know, we're going to get a cardioid whether we want it or not. We're going to get something we maybe not up to the standard piece of equipment that we want. You know, different levels of price points and quality. So besides, you know, the sanitizing, we might not get a choice. People might be bringing their things. And then we almost have to insist, if we're going to touch it, if they bring their own thing and say, well, put this on me, we might have to say, I need to sanitize your mic before I'm going to touch it. And we're going to have our own PPE and things like that. So the game is going to be very different when we all get back. I was talking to somebody the other day, loading trucks, you know, like, how are we going to social distance when people are loading trucks and pushing gear to and from? It's going to be a very, very different time.
But you need to be 6 feet away from each other. Yeah, that's going to be a little tricky.
Got to make
how many guys are going to wear?
Monitor guy do it all.
No, that's easy. All road cases need to be 6 feet long now. It doesn't matter what goes in them. They're just
square.
All 6 feet.
They got to be square too.
Right. Problem solved. Go ahead, Jan.
Yeah, I was in a meeting with Robert Scoville on one of these Zoom things, and he had somebody who is working doing shows right now, and she says now she has a sanitizing kit that, you know, PPE kit that she now has to carry. So I think that's a great idea to get involved with figuring out what the PPE kit would be that we all need to carry with us when we go out on a show. And the other thing I would say is that everybody now who's using in-ears is carrying their own in-ears. So all we have to do as engineers, and you as engineers, me as the salesman, basically have to educate them what they need for that particular show. So they've already bought their in-ears. They might as well buy the right microphones for themselves.
I mean, it's going to be, and we are officially rabbit trailing down what is going to be a whole complete topic that I will add into the things, which is, you know, the new world that we're going to go back into, and how do we feel about it, and what do we think is going to be the best ways to approach it, and where do we think it's going to end up? I mean, to circle it back to kind of the original topic, I had several shows with a particular head of a particular large social media company, who always brought his own microphone that was an Omni, because it worked well for his particular outfit that he wears every day. And I really needed, in this particular environment, a directional microphone, because I just was not going to be able to get enough level out of it. And it became a thing. Like, there was a whole long back and forth conversation, because it's going to look different and it's off brand and this and that, whatever. And you know, I won't go into all the details of that event or anything else, mostly because it's just long and involved. But the interesting part, to circle back to what we're talking about here and bringing your own microphone, the real struggle was, you know, he wanted to use his Omni mic for the reason he wanted to use it, and we may have this kind of problem in the future. And what the ultimate solution was not to force him to use a different microphone. It was his speaking coach getting him to add about 10 dB to his speaking volume all the time. And then, like 2 shows later, my problems disappeared, because basically, you know, he was just coached to, you have to speak louder. Like, we can use what you're using, but and we may have that sort of thing in the future where I've brought my own microphone, and that's great, and it's an Omni, or it's a this, or it's a that. And it's great, happy to use it, but you're not going to be able to whisper on stage and be heard. You're going to have to give, you know, you're gonna have to give us a little bit of something. But anyway, that's kind of hopefully sort of kind of tied it together. Anybody got any last thoughts before we sign off from our friends on YouTube? Go ahead, Jan.
I'd like to throw this out to the group. So is it possible? Is there any telescopic shotgun microphone that will supersede having a cardioid lavalier or a headset mic? Anything out there?
The answer to your question, Jan, is that is a whole show.
Yep, that's another topic. I've done shotgun mics as lectern mics, and I've had really good results with them. We
That's
can
a whole
talk
nother
about
show. So I'm only just going to cut it off because that's a whole other show, and I will add it to my topics of things to talk about. Go ahead, Ike.
I just want to add that until we can take speakers direct, it is actually going to be important for them to actually project and enunciate, because no microphone, no matter what it is going to reach in there and pull the thoughts out of their head. So yeah, I like the speaking coach thing. So
Got to fix the problem at its source. That's a good example.
yeah,
Exactly. So, all right, with that, I think we're going to do this thing and click this thing and click that thing. And we're going to say goodbye to our friends on YouTube. Say goodbye to our friends on YouTube.
Yeah, well, that's like just your opinion, man.